Hi, Jane. So we are going we are going live. Sorry, we've gone live already. So we're going to accept people in, but I'm going to share my screen now so we can have the songs play in the background too. All
All
right.
right, sir.
So I
Future
only be
brains,
reachable
but I want you to be
via
with
text.
me.
Just text me. I'm
I
going to
could
put my phone on do
hope
not disturb so
and
my
pray, so
internet is
make
not
you wait
disrupted.
for
All right.
me.
And
Cause I'll come
yes, hi,
back
Jane.
for
What's up?
you.
So we are
Darling,
going live.
you hold my
Sorry, we've
love.
gone live already. So we're
You
going to accept
are my
people
praise.
in, but I'm going to share my
And
screen
I'll
now.
run to the finish line. My love, I'm gonna go leave you,
Can you confirm
but
that you can hear my
I'm gonna
music
go bounce your
or my
body.
Yes,
computer sound?
sir.
You'll be all on
All right,
my
great.
mind. Yeah,
So
yeah. I'll
People are
be
joining
so
already. I've started
far.
admitting.
yes, I'm taking off the
Promise you'll
waiting room
wait
so everyone
for
can join immediately.
me.
Thanks.
I go
All right,
think
that's
of
fine.
you every day, my love. Yeah, yeah. I may not come today, but I'll be with you. I'll be so far away. Promise you'll wait for me. I could think of you every day, my love. Yeah, yeah. I may not come today, but I'll be with you again. I really pray for you every day, my love. Yeah, yeah. My love, I think of you tonight. 'Cause I know they're by your side. Just wait a little while, yeah. Know that I'm alright. I'll go see you soon. Make you wait for me, my dear. Find your light, it will show you the road. It will lead you. And after the dark, the sun will shine. Keep your heart, my friend. Don't lose yourself. In the morning time, the sun will shine.
Hello, Toby. It's China. Oh, okay, Jonathan. Okay, Prof, I was going to speak to you actually. I think I'll start sharing your slide. Yeah, we still have 3 more minutes here. Let's just go into time. Are you starting on the top of the hour? Exactly, ma. 1 minute more to
Okay,
go.
okay.
Good morning. Happy New Year from all of us from the Manuscript Writing Hub. It's the year 2026, and we are continuing in our process of domesticating knowledge of research to African researchers. And as is a norm for us as Manuscript Writing Hub, ethics is often our cutting razor because we believe that the soul of research is ethical practice, and therefore we ensure that in all we do, ethics play a key role in it. So this morning, we'll be starting our ethics session, which is going to run over the course of 4 weeks in the month of January, where we'll be diving into critical aspects, important aspects of ethics, and how we can make sure that it plays a role in our research practice. It's often said that decision on ethics is not a difficult one most times, but there are times at which you need to have a deep critical thinking using the principles of ethics to take decisions in research and clinical care. And these are the areas we're going to be focusing on in this conversation. And you agree with me, there's no better place to do this than a foremost research ethicist or a leading scholar in research ethics, Professor Morenike Folayan, who will be taking us through this course. In the course of the training, we also have a fresh blood coming to also take 1 or 2 sessions. So it's going to be a mix of the very experienced and expert in the field, and also someone who is also high rising and flying in the course of ethics. With that, I'll call on Professor Morenike Folayan to take the stage. Good morning, Prof.
Good morning, Kudus. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here this morning. I'm sure for a number of us, this will be our first lecture for the year. This is my own first lecture that I'm giving for the year. I once again want to reiterate the issue Kudus raised, that research ethics is fundamental. One of the things I've seen in my own personal life is once you understand and imbibe the principles of research ethics, it is not only applicable to ethics, it's applicable to your entire life. The beauty about it is that it changes life for good. It's not, oh, I'm in research and then my ethical principles and ethical practices outside. So please join us through this 4 weeks of intense training. There's a peculiarity about our training in research ethics as different from other training we do. The first peculiarity is that the training happens all week. Although we are going to do the first lecture, which is a 1-hour lecture, throughout the 7 days, we would be engaging on the platform as per what we have learned. So please, I encourage you to discuss. One of the things you'll find with ethics is that there's consensus. We discuss, raise issues, and then reach consensus. Because why? You would learn about that as we go on. The second thing also that I think I want to bring here to discuss is, unlike our past sessions, we had developed this content of this course based on your responses. So it's peculiar. Many of it I am also going to be teaching for the first time, but ethics is engaging, and I look forward to an engaging session with you. So let's get into this. You already have the slides. I hope I'm not going to spend time with it. I'm looking forward to your questions. Please drop the questions in the chat box so as to allow for order, and then we can take a lot more of the questions because it's in the chat box. So once again, I welcome you. As we already shared on the platform, we have a diverse group. That some of us that are young learners that haven't gone through these courses before, but quite a number of us that have gone through multiple ethics courses. However, it's the same thing. We would try to, we've designed the course in a way that will carry everybody along. Hopefully at this end of this week, knowing that this week is starting with this lecture, you'll be able to identify the core ethics principles that had been developed based on historical frameworks. And I'd like to emphasize that as I go through the lecture today. It's also very important that you recognize how these principles are applied to your research design. You would not be reading a lot about it in my session, in this lecture, but throughout the entire week, we would be discussing how each of those principles apply to our design of research. The third thing that I also want to recognize here is that we know apologetically that we are very heavy biomedical in our focus. And that's because it is our background, and this is how your background tends to influence your thinking and your application. We are struggling and hoping we get better with the way we apply these principles to other things beyond biomedics. So please walk with us through this. When we sway heavily towards biomedics, please use your own critical thinking to help us sway back with you to other areas of research, arts, humanities, physical chemistry, beyond biomedicals. And we hope that during the engagement on the platform, you will bring this up in a way that will learn to see through the lenses of this principle its application to other areas of research beyond the biomedics. By the end of the session, we should understand why ethics matters, where the principles come from, and what the principles are, and how you'll be able to spot ethical issues which otherwise could have become a dilemma. These are key defining terms. You should have already gotten through that. Research ethics itself is moral. Please, I emphasize that. That's the distinction between ethics and law. Ethics is moral. The next two slides will take you through why it is a moral thing. And when we're talking about responsible conduct of research, a lot is dependent on you understanding the morals because it is not law. And it's dependent on you applying and respecting this principle in the way that you're respectful for everybody. In that way, when you understand ethics, use of yourself to apply these principles to the apply herself or be guided by those principles. We'll see how things break down. Usually to the disadvantage of vulnerable populations. So what is this about? What is the slide? If anybody knows the big deal about the slide, it is the scale. It is the skill. I've talked already about what ethics is. Its integrity, its value, its choice, its consciousness, conscience, is right, is honesty, but we make those choices. But the big thing you would see about ethics, which differs from law, is the balance of the scale. In the law, in terms of the scale of the law, it is not balanced. It is skewed to right. Whereas in ethics, there's a balance between right and wrong. Is it that it is elevating wrong? No. It is because in ethics, you have to look through the lens of everybody and understand why it is wrong. So if somebody stole, let's say somebody stole bread or stole, the museum and broke into the museum, ethics will ask, why did you do this? Why did you do this? And through the lens of that why, understand the positioning of that person. The law, because if you've infringed the law, you are a thief, and that's the end of the law. That is the major difference. And so because there's a lot of reasoning that goes into ethics, you have to reflect. We end up in ethics not saying right and wrong. We find the balance in the middle. And that's why with ethics, there's a lot of argument. There's an understanding of the environmental context that makes things right and wrong. The fact that for you, sex work is wrong, when you ask a sex worker why they are doing sex work, you will find that you likely sway because there's a reason informing their sex work, not because of the right and wrong based on moral principles. So these are the kind of differences and the critical mind that you bring to ethics that makes, things a lot more better. So why is research ethics? Is defining what is right and wrong, understanding that what is right and wrong. It's context specific. When you even think of Nigeria, you will be amazed that what is right and wrong is different from the North, is different from the South, is different from the East, and is different from the West because of communal thinking, not necessarily the law. With the law, what is right and wrong is black and white, is written. But when you think about the communal life in the culture, what is right and wrong is not always black and white. And it takes you to be conscious of this, to be able to stay right even within the good and the bad. So it's determining what is right from what is wrong when conceiving, conducting, and reporting research. This is where we're honing in. Kudus noted that when we're thinking about research, we're thinking about clinical practice, we're thinking of a living practice. There are many points where we apply ethics. Right here in this training, we're thinking about applying ethics for research. And like I said, for the next 1 week, we'll be going through on our platform what this principle means for research and the various research points. It's boundary about accepting conduct of research according to the rules that comply you as a researcher. So once again, remember that we live as part of multiple communities, and the rights and wrongs within each community might differ. In the research community, there is an understanding of what is right and wrong based on principles, and you will be going through those 4 principles today. All right. And what the big deal, why is it? Why do we do research ethics? It's so that we guard against those that will be abused, the vulnerable. We must guard and protect them. Otherwise, we lose that sense of that guard in the pursuit of data, in the pursuit of our research. It is very easy, and we'll see an example of that. When we go through the historical context, it brings it to life. Many of you may have heard about the Nazi war crime. I'm not going to go through that. That is why you had the slides before now. If you had read the slide, if you've never heard about the Nazi war crime, you should have gone to read about it. But what happened during the Nazi time was, the Jews were captured by Germans, and because they were prisoners, there were assumptions that rather than them dying and wasting, they can be used for research. Please read my lips as I say these things. For words that I want to emphasize, I emphasize them. Please note that when we talk about ethical conduct of research, we never use people. We never use people. And I say it a third time, we never use people. Because what people are human beings, and they must be respected for who or whatever they are. And once again, when you're doing research, don't bring your judgment. The first thing you must understand about research is that we are humans and you're dealing with human beings. You do not classify and relate with human beings because they are white or black, east or north, gray or yellow, child or adult. You relate with everybody around the humanness of who they are. And that's why human rights principles are cross-cutting. The first thing you deal with is this person is human. And this was one of the fundamentals about the crime of the Nazi persons. They dealt with them as prisoners of war, less so human beings. And so they did atrocious things, horrific things. And when you hear, you wonder how anybody could have conceived it. But for them, it was rather than they dying as prisoners of war, why not use them in a way to generate knowledge for the good of people? And so you had horrible things like freezing experiments, where you put people in cold water and see how long it takes them inside the cold water before they die. What are the physiological changes that happens in their body if they are freezing? How long does it change for things to happen if they're not clothed, if they're not sheltered, and they're in the cold? These are horrific things, I'm sure you know, but these were the things they did in the name of gathering knowledge. Okay? And nothing to relieve their pain. There were other things about gun wounds. You shoot them at what velocity, with this velocity, what's the depth, of the wound, what kind of burning happens when you amputate their lips, what are the biological or chemical elements that happen, terrible things. Or you stab people life and say, oh, how many liters of blood is spilled per second? How does this gush? These are just a few examples. If you have read about the Nazi work, you'd have learned about a lot of those things. And so at the end of the war, there was an international tribunal that brought those persons together, majorly doctors. And I emphasize this, don't think they were all doctors, who performed this experiment on the concentration camp. Ask me, why were they doing it? They were all researching to be able to get papers for publication so as to put them in a position, good positions after the war. Why am I emphasizing this? It's all about research. We need to be conscious about the way research you do can drive you to do unethical things. So I'm in the midst of everybody. It seems sane. And it's the same thing that happens with you as researchers. that if you do not recognize the potential for you to do insane things in the name of running after data, you would not subject yourself to regulations. And because of this, regulations happened. 23 prisoners, including 20 doctors, were tried and 15 were found guilty and 7 were sentenced to death. One of the things I also teach about this, please note that these were doctors that took the Hippocratic oath not to hurt anybody. So these are not just ordinary people. These are people that have taken oaths not to harm, yet they were army. The second thing also I bring about this is that, please, these are human beings. They're not devils. They're not red with red horns or black with gray horns, or they had 5 horns. They were human beings like you and I. So what does that tell you? You are not infallible. I repeat it, you are not infallible. You, every single 93% on this platform, can fall into the trap if you are not only guarded by yourself. We'll talk about the principles that should guide you, 5 of which I will discuss, as well as allow others to guide you, because you may not see everything. And that's why the ethics committee becomes very important. Whether you're doing biomedical research, whether you're doing physical sciences, social sciences, arts, whatever type of research you're doing, then the ethics committee becomes the external eye that can see beyond which you can see. Because once you are indebted, ingrained in your research, you don't see things, which is normal, and you must appreciate that. So following the Nuremberg trial, there were 10 points, and this was the beginning of formalization of the ethics principles. Ethics, I mean, things happen, people believe, people know what is right and wrong, or were expected to know what is right and wrong, until this eventualities and then the Nuremberg Code had to be developed. Please note that this is not the first kind of war. This was the aggravation of it. It had started multiple times before, multiple ways in multiple formats. We'll talk about that on the platform. I can't bring it here because of time. So what are the principles that emerged? These are the pictures. You should have seen them. 10 short principles, one of which is voluntary consent. Nobody must participate in your research without them choosing to participate. After you have told them what the research is about, that's why it's voluntary consent. And that the study that will be conducting must be conducted by a competent person, a person who knows and understands the extent and whatever there is about the research. And it is the duty and responsibility of that PI or whoever is trained for the responsibility to be delegated on to ensure the quality of consent received. And then finally, please know that your participant must be able to withdraw at any time in that study. That you mustn't design a study in a way that keeps the person in that study and has no option but to stay whatever it is that you're doing. Person must be able to withdraw at any time out of liberty. That's why it's voluntary consent. I'm only choosing to help with this research, knowing that my information is important and I'm giving it. Don't coerce me in any way. These are things we'll continue to discuss on the platform. However, please look at the date. The Nuremberg Code was defined or put together by 1948, and it was published. However, between 1932 and 1972, there was still horrific research going on. This is the Tuskegee research. What is the Tuskegee research about? You should have gone to read it if you have read if you had studied the document. What happened is that in America, they were looking at the history of syphilis, which is not, even nowadays, people don't look at history in that light. You must be able to give support to people who you research. For example, if you're studying the prevalence of cervical cancer, the prevalence of diabetes, you must be able to assure that the people you find have cancer or diabetes have access to treatment. There is no point studying the prevalence of cervical cancer and prevalence of diabetes when the person cannot access treatment. So when you find people that have the lesion, you must refer them for treatment, not necessarily that you have to give them or pay for that treatment. You must refer them. So it's not about using people. Remember, I read my lips again, we don't use people. Your research is supposed to improve lives and wellness. And therefore, your system that you design for that research must support their life and wellness. You must not exploit. And that was what happened in the syphilis Tuskegee study. When there was no antibiotics, people were looking at the history of syphilis. Ironically, I mean, everybody was looking. But then when penicillin came and was discovered, they kept 300 Afro-Americans from preventing them from accessing penicillin so that they can continue to study the effect of syphilis. This happened despite the Nuremberg Code. Okay, and this was bad enough that President Bill Clinton had to apologize for those that were surviving. So this is the history. Sadly, it was the Black Americans, and this is why in America you find Blacks not very, very willing to participate. And this is in America. So don't think it can not happen anywhere. This was in America. The research continued in America until it was discovered by a journalist. And that resulted in another set of code, written code 1974. Okay, the Belmont Report, and that emphasized the three principles: respect for persons, beneficence, if you flip it, the other side is non-maleficence, and justice. What are we talking about? The first principle is autonomy, respect for persons, meaning that you must respect individuals' right to make that decision. But also beyond that, when you contextualize this principle, you contextualize it to respect for cultures and communities. You not only respect individuals, you respect the collective autonomy. If people, for example, like I give examples, in the North, in the South, it does not matter if you're doing a vaginal examination that a male doctor examines. In the North, you wouldn't do this because their own ethics does not allow for male doctors to examine. You can't say, oh, the Beijing right was in 1972, so I'm coming to the North. You should have changed by now. No, you respect the persons and respect community practices when you're doing your research. The result of your research might change the behaviors of a collective, but you don't change or expect the behaviors of a collective to change so that you can do your research. And you apply it by ensuring informed consent, by enabling people to withdraw. Please know that consent means that you tell them one-on-one. Don't give them paper to read. You inform them, read, discuss it, and then they sign the form. And confidentiality means you ensure that their data is treated with autonomy, and people that do not have rights to that data do not have it. I am shocked and continue to be shocked when you go into offices of people and papers that are used to collect data is just on the table. This isn't confidential handling. People can read those papers and put two and two together and identify who the person, the respondent is. All right. And consent must be made in a language that the person understands. In Nigeria, the legal law is that every consent you do must be not more than that which a GSS3 student can understand. So plain language does not mean English. If the person cannot speak English, you have to be able to engage this person in the language that they understand. The second principle is about beneficence. Beneficence says you must maximize all possible benefits. Understanding that in research, there is nothing called risk-free. There is no risk-free research. In research, what you have is minimum, moderate, or high risk. There is no zero risk in research. People can use alternative use of their time if they are answering questionnaire studies. There's an alternative use of that time. So if you then engage a person to use time, and at the end of the day, you just drop it in the ocean, or you use people's time, publish it for your PhD thesis, master's thesis, undergraduate thesis, and all you do is just pack it and put it under the table, and nobody uses it, you're not benefiting, you're wasting people's time. You're disrespectful of the time of the people that have given you information. So what does this mean? In your design of the study must be such that good outweighs harm. Remember, once again, there is always harm. There's no research that is free of harm. There are 5 different types of harm. We'll be talking about that when we're talking about risk. But your research must be such that good outweighs harm. Okay? And an example is where you want to do trials about what is a promising medication. Please note that despite the fact that good outweighs harm, as much as possible, you must minimize harm. Whatever harm there is, you must do everything to minimize it. where it's possible to eliminate what is not needed, any harm that you don't unnecessarily have to incur, please do that. And this is why the participants must be respected, because they're the celebrated heroes. When participants are not there, you don't have any research. For most parts, of course, we appreciate that there are leaves and there are animals and there are chemicals and other things. But in all this ecosystem of research, human beings are present. If you talk about your chemicals, for example, more recently, we're starting to find out that the use of Teflon, the non-stick in the pans, is predisposing to cancer. Okay, so at that time, of course, non-stick and pans had nothing to do with humans, but it's humans that are going to use the pans. And now we're seeing that that non-stick is causing cancer, is a risk factor for cancer. So if you're not considering humans in all you're doing, whether chemistry or whether it's plants or animals, when you're not considering life in that entirety, even when you're dealing with plants, you're talking about conservation. The bioconservation is not only about the leaves, it's about the One Health system, where when you're not thinking of the bioconservation, zoonotic diseases are coming into existence and human beings are at risk. So it's a whole ecosystem that you must think about. And what is it that you're doing? So even if you're doing leaves and cutting branches, you must replace these plants. Because if you do not replace it, you're affecting climate change, you're affecting zoonotic diseases, and you're affecting human life. So these are all the consideration. This is not just about biomedical research, it's a whole concept of bringing safety and thinking about safety protocols wherever it is, whether in the lab or on the field, and what the stopping rules are. So when we're talking about non-maleficence, we recognize that there are 5 risks. There's physical risk, psychological risk, emotional risk, financial risk, and legal risk. So how do you minimize this risk? How do you minimize this risk? Okay, we'll be talking about this on the platform. Not all research benefits researchers and participants directly, but yet they bear the risk. And you know what? When the Nobel Prize is given to you for your discovery, you don't remember those participants. You don't remember them. So please, while we're engaging with them, we must be respectful of them all the time. And as much as possible, we make sure that we bring benefit to them. We'll talk about this on the platform. And finally, is the principle of justice, the most difficult to adhere to. Of all the principles, everybody around the world in ethics knows that this is the least respected. Yet it is the most important, where you have fair distribution of research burdens and benefit. And how does this apply? You must equitably select participants and avoid exploitation. I tell people that, look, for example, in our biomedical research, you want to recruit participants, you go to where it is easy. Who goes to Victoria Land to go and recruit participants? Nobody, because 1, the dogs will chase you if you have access to the place. 2, you won't even go because the walls cannot allow you inside. And then what happens? You now go to Ajegunle and Agege, where you have 1,000,001 persons lined on the street, and you say, oh, come and take 100 naira transport fee. Then you have a queue. In 2 days, you have finished your study. But you know what? At the end of your study in Agege and Ajegunle, it is the people in Victoria Land that you never recruited into your study that's going to benefit from the outcome. This is injustice. So what we say is that you go and recruit participants from those that is going to benefit from them. You do not use prisoners because prisoners are easy to outcome. You do not use military person because it just takes their commandant to say, hey, my cantonment people, come and queue up. And then they're all queuing up because I know the cantonment officer. You must ensure equitable distribution of risk and benefits. For example, one of the world global research, is hepatitis. Hepatitis research is burdened in Africa and Asia. And that time when they did the research around hepatitis, they did it in Africa and Asia. Who benefited? The global north. It's only 40 years after, 40 years that the benefit of the vaccines and the therapies have been done before we in Africa are starting to have access to it. Well, this is what we're talking about. You, as the researchers, that bring this kind of research. It is you that open the door for this research that allows exploitation of our people. In the name of your $1,000 honorarium, you open the door. The worst thing that happens in this system is that you even carry a specimen in the name of your PhD. You carry it in your box and take it away there. And then you leave it there. And then they explore going through and understanding genetics and all that to our own advantage. If we do not think critically about this, we do not understand how we expose ourselves as a people to injustice. Please note, I have nothing against North and South collaboration. I have nothing against South and South. I have nothing against the global North. I am just putting examples on the table to understand that we must think through the ethical lens to ensure that the burdens are distributed and the benefits are equally distributed. So when we're thinking about justice, we also must recognize that special populations that needs to be protected, elderly, homeless, prisoners. If you look at the history of exploitation, these are the people that are often was affected, the less empowered persons. Therefore, the ethics committee protects them, but you as researchers must also put yourself in a position to start to protect them. Guatemala study also tells us what happened. Although when we looked at the Tuskegee study, the Tuskegee study showed us that the Black Americans were recruited, but they didn't infect them with syphilis. They only looked at the history of syphilis in their life. However, when the Guatemala syphilis study was discovered in 2010, I was actually in the US and I met the person, that actually discovered this. It was eye-opening, a female anthropologist. And I'll talk about that very briefly. In Guatemala, they were infected, actually, with syphilis. They were infected. So tell me, because they want to look at the cost and the effectiveness of antibiotics on STIs, at the time when there wasn't anything to cure, or cure well. So they were infected. So there is a form of research now that looks at you giving infecting and treating. You only do that for lesions with their treatment, but these are the things we want to look at. What does it mean to do that in the US or do that in Nigeria? And I can tell you so many studies, but we have limited time. I really want to give time to discussions. Does this thing happen in Nigeria or Africa? I don't know where you are for the context you're coming for. It does. It does. In my own field, we find people doing part 2 research. They would burden their research participants with things that they should not be paying for. For example, you are doing a study on malaria. We know that malaria, if you come the first day, you do your test, you get your diagnosis. The worst is for me to ask you to come in 3 or 5 days time to look at your results. But because I'm collecting parameters and perimeters, I'll be telling you to come every day. And I will not give you transport reimbursement. I'm not taking care of your time that you're wasting. And I'm not telling you that I'm asking you to come every day because of my research. Or I'm doing a malaria test. I want to look at the impact of malaria on the chest. And then I put the bill of your radiograph into your test and I don't pay for it. It happens frequently, maybe not all the time, but it happens so heavily in the research you're doing. We're transferring the cost and the pain of our research to research participants who pay for it. We don't reimburse them for things that you do. We coerce our research participants into enrolling in research. I've done a specific research that I brought in people from that were involved in research and I studied. They don't even know that they were research they were doing. They don't have the informed consent. I hope you know that when people sign the consent, they should have a copy and go away with it and read it. They knew the sign, they don't have copies. And there's things like soft coercion. For example, in the days of HIV, when they were doing that, that this person, once it starts taking an antiretroviral, it cannot stop. Then you do a research that person has no alternative. So even if your research is being wicked to them, they can't stop participating because it's only through your research that they have the drugs. So you have coerced this person to continue because this person has no alternative than to get the drugs from you. Or you participants enroll in your research, they don't know what it is they're enrolling in. For example, you are a lecturer. You say, fill my questionnaire. And then class captain, please collect the questionnaire and please collect the class attendance. Tell me which your students would opt out, even when you say, it's not free, it's voluntary. We require students will have practices. Okay? Or you get a grant In the grant, you said you're giving your participant $100, and then in reality, you give them 100 naira. You know, we do many things in Nigeria, and we have to start changing that. Of course, we have our own history of abuse in Nigeria, and the Trovan study, which happened in Kano, when people use epidemics, to come collect data in the name of help, and it's still happening. It is actually still happening. A few years back, I was challenging people that what was the study? They were doing study, but they were looking at molecular biology. Then they were asking us, come and screen for cervical cancer. But they were doing molecular studies. They weren't telling us they were doing molecular studies. They were just asking you to come and screen as if they were helping you. And it happens. I've seen in ophthalmology also in Lagos. It happens, and this was what happened in Kano during that crisis, the meningitis crisis. We know we have to have seasons. And then they used Trovan drug for children that had not been tested for. They recruited 200 children, and of course, people died. One of the things you see about the history, and I tell when I tell the story, and before I go into the details of the Trovan trial, is that when these abuses are exposed, it's not even your colleagues that expose them, they're journalists. See, every history of exposure so far, it's not your peers that tell on you, the people, but you know what, your career can be messed up years when you're advancing, when people then investigate you and tell your story of exploitation. So you have to be careful of your career now that you're building because of a future, and there are many people's career that has been destroyed by this exploitation, exploration. For example, the first female president of Harvard, I think, that's a prestigious position. In 2 weeks, she was gone. Why? Because she has a history of plagiarism. She wasn't careful of her history. That was the height of success, the first Black female president of Harvard. And in 2 weeks, she was down because they reminded her of her history of plagiarism. Who are you here that you're using students' research without acknowledging them as co-authors? You never know when this your history would come haunting you. So you must continue to protect that history now. In the Trovan study, there were 5 things that happened. They didn't get ethics clearance. They had undue influence by offering special beds for people who came for their trial. They used a drug that had not been proven for treatment in children. And then they gave weak versions. So the ideal therapy dose, they lowered it, to compare. And then they used double standard application. I guess you must have read this. I'm not going into this in detail. But when they went to court, that is why ethics committee becomes very powerful. When they were going to court, they went saying with an ethics clearance. What happened? They got an ethics clearance from the Ministry of Health in Kano with one person, the CAMSEC signing. So when the Ulubala started, they went confidently. That is why ethics clearance is powerful. It's powerful. They did not budge. They went to court with the ethics clearance until in court they proved to them that that was not ethics clearance. Ethics clearance meant there must have been a committee sitting and looking. And at that time of the research, there was no committee in Kano. When they proved to them they never got the clearance, and that is not the clearance, then Pfizer decided to settle out of court because they know that they had been gotten down. Of course, we settled out of court. Any reasonable place would have banned Pfizer from ever coming back to Nigeria. So what does all this lesson tell us? How does it add up? That regulation does not curb unethical behavior. See the histories and see the times of repetition of unethical practices. We have to choose to be ethical in our behavior, because when you're unethical, you will always find ways around the rules, especially in Nigeria, where it just takes you to go and beg the people that be and bring their KBAC, and then they will change the rules. Regulation does not. We have to be people who are ethical in our practices. And there might be need to enforce regulations to make it work. And that's why ethics committee are in place to ensure that people are guarded, that the vulnerable are protected, that you do not unnecessarily do harm for the one person that matters. And that ethical behavior, sorry, I'm having problems in the last time, is not inborn. We have to learn it. And that's why you came to the ethics class today. Okay. So, how do we identify ethical principles? Please know that the principles are just tools, they're not answers. At times there will be tension between principles, and we must choose to find that answer, even despite the tension. Sorry. Sorry, something went wrong with my slide. So we must choose to find answers between these tensions. For example, there's a researcher who wants to study malaria prevention in a rural community, and then he decides to give free mosquito nets to some people, and then the other half, one he doesn't give them mosquito nets. When you think of when you think of this as a research, it is right, black and white. It is right. There's nothing wrong. One side has, I mean, when you're running after data, but when you're thinking of the humans involved, knowing that malaria, mosquito nets is definitely important to prevent malaria, you'll know that there's something unethical about this. So when you ask yourself, what is the principle's intention? Beneficence versus justice? What ethical issues do you support? You know, when people have free mosquito nets, the people that don't have mosquito nets that you use as control, what happens to them having malaria? What is it that you do for those that have malaria in the control, which will happen because they didn't have mosquito nets? And how would you redesign this in an ethical fashion? I try to provide an answer. An alternative design might be to stagger, because you need that data. But what it means is that those that are in the control, you might, after the study, you give them mosquito nets. Otherwise, you don't just expose everybody, a large number of people. So you're recruiting 1,000 people to have mosquito nets, the 1,000 people not to have. That is undue exposure. Of course, some of you as researchers will say, oh, but before on when we were not there, they didn't have mosquito net. So it's a mosquito net that they are giving advantage. No, you don't see wrong and reinforce wrong. So you could stagger it. You could have, you recruit the first 25, 26, 13 have mosquito nets, 13 doesn't have. Then you move to the next, knowing that this other 13, you will give them their mosquito nets so that you don't unduly expose. You can design this study better in a way that there is beneficence within that study. Okay? So ethical thinking means making uncomfortable questions, confronting those uncomfortable questions, resolving those uncomfortable questions before you start the research. And when you have this kind of ethical dilemma, because this was an ethical dilemma, you're designing research, yet you have to bring humanness into it. And I can tell you many examples I've been involved in. Consult your supervisor, consult your mentors, I meant not mentees, consult your HREC, review the ethical guideline. Nigeria has one of the best ethics guidelines in the world, and it's acknowledged. It's not because I'm a Nigerian. It is publicly acknowledged in the ethics circle. Our ethics guideline is one of the best in the world, if not the best, because at the time we developed it, we took everything into consideration. Engage your peers, seek excellent expertise. I'm amazed when people do research and they're the only one conceptualizing research from beginning to end. It's impossible. You can think through everything. You must ask people to improve what you have and then document the process. Finally, you as researchers must learn to think, because on the ethics board, they're thinking for the participants. And could you please let me know when I can't see the time here, so you have to let me know. You as a researcher must. Okay.
You have 15 minutes more. You have 15 minutes to top of the hour.
All right, I'll soon finish. So you as a researcher must also think about what it means for your ethics, fairness, where you're collaborating and negotiating with authors in your practice. Integrity must be a standard one. You must not only maintain scientific integrity, you must maintain ethical integrity. You must ensure that everything you're doing has integrity underlying it, even in your design, in your interpretation of the research. You don't interpret 0.051 to 0.05 because you want statistical significance. 0.051 is not statistically significant. You know it. Then you decide to cut off. Now is when you want to approximate all the zeros to 2 decimal spaces because you want that one to go. Is that clear? So ethical integrity, because when you do research, once again, it's not about you. It's about finding a universal truth. It's not about you generating your manuscripts and your papers and your promotion. It's about getting truth out there for the world to use to achieve an answer of what the world does not know. And when you generate information that is not truth, you are enabling the world to build on non-truth. And of course, it's going to be a world that will fall. Ethical integrity also matters. Transparency. In whatever you're doing with your collaborators, you must be transparent, constructive, timely, open. You know, you will find all the details in the slide. You must be accountable. This is one of the principles that I continue to push. Accountability comes before trust. Do not build a relationship based on trust. Build it on accountability. Because with accountability, I can take you to court. Trust you will abuse as friends, and that cannot be taken to court. Okay? And finally, autonomy. You must recognize that people are human beings and they have a right to refuse. And you must not penalize them for refusing to take part in your research. And this is usually the headache with doctors and patients. Patients will participate because they're afraid that the quality of their treatment will be compromised if they do not. Because in the system, there's still hierarchy. It's not flat, and there's no way to seek for justice. So you must appreciate these complexities in relating with humans and do not take anything for granted. In conclusion, please know that it's the history of abuse that has led to development of principles. And with these principles, we must learn. We must learn. It does not happen automatically. We must learn how to apply those principles within our context. And that research ethics actually emerged from real harm to people. One of the things you would see is that from assuming that people will behave ethically, principles have been raised to guard us to be able to behave ethically. And that's the same way all around. In our universities where we are, we must have rules guiding. You assume people will behave respectfully. If you do not have rules and regulation guiding that, it will not happen. People have evolved, and the way they think of harm and good differs by people. Until you put it in writing and saying that from my University of Ife, these are the principles that we operate when we're doing harm. And when we're doing research, if you do not put it, then people cannot be wrong. And so in your universities, if you do not have rules and regulation, you start it. You start it, you're not too small. Go start pushing around that the universities itself must have principles, research ethics principles, research policy that guides your practice. And ethic thinking is proactive, it's not reactive. Next week, we'll be talking about the actual forms of those principles and committees and its procedures. And now that we know what to look for, next week, we'll be learning how to implement it. And this is my final thought, that ethics is not about a good person versus a bad person. No, it's about a systematic way of thinking, of acting, of behaving to ensure that our excitement about discoveries never overshadow our responsibilities to those who make the discovery possible. On that note, I want to say thank you and acknowledge that the slides were developed by adapting that from Professor Ademola Adejuwa. Thank you very much. Over to you, producer.
Thank you very much, Prof. One key message is that research ethics is not ingrained, it is learned, and we are here to learn. Thank you very much. I mean, there are a lot of messages to pick from the presentation. We have about 5 questions, so I will quickly dive into them. The first question here reads, good morning, Prof. Can paying the participants of a research be interpreted as a form of benefit to them?
Thank you. Excellent question. The word you have used is paying. In ethics, we don't pay. You can pay. You can reimburse. Okay. One of the things we over notice that when you reimburse, many times the reimbursement is a lot more than what is actually needed. So, for example, if participants are coming to your clinics or they are coming to meet you at a particular place for IDI or FGI, then you reimburse them for their transport. I have argued in a paper about the place for payments because everybody in the research enterprise is paid except for the research participants who actually are the ones generating the data that makes your research feasible. Every other person in that enterprise is paid. Every other person in that enterprise becomes rich. Everybody but the research participant. But until then, when the rules of our community of research changes, participants are not paid, but they are reimbursed for their time. For example, if you're going to recruit orange sellers, okay, to do your research. Remember that the 5 hours they are with you means they've lost income during that period for selling their orange. And you know that for people in our environment, there are lots more informal workers than formal workers. And especially when you're doing research with women, there are lots more informal workers. So what you'll be doing is reimbursing for that time, not paying for their participation. I hope that is helpful. Over.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. So someone wants to know at what point ethical violation becomes a legal issue.
Thank you very much. That's the point where you infringe on the right of individuals. That's the point where ethics then becomes law. Once you start to infringe on the right of persons, then ethics becomes a legal issue. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. Yeah. Just a comment that Pfizer was punished for the infraction, but the Nigerian researchers involved were not punished.
Pfizer was not punished. Pfizer actually negotiated outside the court, and they paid negotiating outside. There was no legal punishment. There was no punishment. It's you settling out of court, and then you paid for the damages. How do you pay for the damages of the dead children? How do you pay for that? How do you pay for the damages of those that were blind? When you know what is right and you chose to do what is wrong because you're exploiting an environment where the rules are weak. How much of punishment is that? If you decide that it's punishment. I think also when you think about that, when you talk about the researchers were not punished, it's also acknowledging that there's a time where people don't know. And that was what happened with Pfizer. You exploited the not knowing of people. And that exploitation sadly continues on today, not even at individual level, even onto national levels. Just to digress a little, more recently, we saw what happened in Kenya, where Kenya signed away for multiple years its data, its human data. And then people went screaming. And for me, my own position was that he doesn't know. He is the president. At what time did the Association of Dentists, all these associations that you all belong to, at what time in the entire history of the rule of this president did you put a white position paper in a way that he reads and understands? Then you're not flogging him for what he does not know. For him, what is that now? I'm going to have 1 billion. You know that Kenya is so much in debt that they can't even get global loan anymore. So every little money that it can come as a government, it will take it. But he took that because he did not know. And I want to challenge you people here, whoever you are, that you are in associations. All we do in our associations is collect money and do end of year, anniversary, or one. What is it that we do? We just bring conferences. That has no impact. Just a tech talk. Okay, we have done the conference for this year. What comes out of your conference? Nothing. We have Nigerian academies of whatever they are, who amongst us regularly write on these contemporary issues and put a white paper to the governments so that the governments read our own page. Even if they don't respond, it's there, and with time, they will find our papers important. What changes do we bring? Out of ethical responsibilities as associations, Nigerian Association of Pediatricians, Nigerian Association of Civil Engineering, Nigerian Association, we're only reactive when one bridge falls. That is when you see the Nigerian Association of Civil Engineers coming. It is only when there's a crime that Nigerian Association of Bar of Lawyers decide. We are never proactive in a way that we are helping our systems. And when you think about this with an ethical lens, we should appreciate that we should be forefront in making things happen to prevent. Okay, I don't know what brought me to this long talk. What was the question? Produce apologies.
Yeah, you've answered the question actually.
Okay, then. All right, I'll keep quiet now.
So we have about 3 more questions to go.
Okay, let's quickly do that.
Someone is asking, can a research be unethical and be beneficial at the same time? If yes, how do you want to go about it?
Can a research be
unethical?
It can't be. Stop it. Stop. No, I think that was the lesson we learned from Nazi crime. There is a seeming sense of generating data from an unethical process. The knowledge that the Nazi investigation is it important? Yes, it is important. But generating good knowledge unethically is not acceptable. You can generate that knowledge ethically. You can generate that knowledge ethically. But you can't be unethical in a way that you want to generate knowledge. No. And that is why things are put in place now to cut it off, to cut that process of injuring humans in the name of generating knowledge. No, and please note that there is no research that science cannot be bad and ethics good. It never. Once science is bad, ethics is bad. However, science can be good and ethics is bad. This is what the kind of thing you're talking about. There are lots of studies that the science is good, but the ethics is bad. But science can never be good and ethics is good. Okay, thank you. Over. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is kind of related. I'll just cut it brief. The person is asking that based on the high financial implication of doing research, there is sometimes cutting of corner intentionally or unintentionally. How do one overcome this temptation, which is common in our environment?
It's a temptation, and it's about training. It's about knowing. Once you are competent, you won't go the shortcut. You will know what is right. Well, that doesn't rule it out, but you must, once you respect that, you must go through ethics committee. That is an external oversight. They will also help to see and address that. Of course, that doesn't completely erode corruption in a system. The National Coordinating Body of Ethics Committee also mandates that all ethics committee must be trained every 2 years, so that the competency of those overseeing research is continuously built in a way that they are doing what is right and they are doing what is contemporary in their decision making. So there are whole systems. Of course, we know that there's nothing perfect, but at least it can minimize the injury when we follow the rules. And there is a place for you to continuously educate your peers, because the more we understand, the better we are at applying. And then it's easier to apply. There's always an alternative, a good alternative to shortcuts. But of course, remember what we said, unethical practices continue to exist, but we must have whistleblowers. And we'll be talking about next week. There's a place for whistleblowers. In systems where there are whistleblowers, it continues to reduce unethical practice. We can never eliminate it, but we can reduce it. Thank you. Over to you.
All right, so we have 3 minutes more. This is not an ethical question.
We'll take one question
let me just
and then move every other thing to the platform. Thank you.
To the chat box. Okay, someone is asking, doing research in a different study area due to insecurity and extending the finding to one study area. I think it's more of study design than ethics. What do you think, man?
Yeah, you know that you already answered yourself. It's not generalizable. What happened you can't extend its practice. You can theorize the extension in your paper, but you can't do it. It's not going to work. It's the same thing why you as a researcher in Nigeria has the ethical obligation to continue to produce quality research that will inform policies and practice. It's your obligation. It's no other person's obligation. It's you in the academia. Nobody can do it for you. Please know that as those of you in the academia, your primary responsibility, of course, if you teach, you are only doing something somebody else is doing. Those in NYNCE can teach better. Community service, you're only doing somebody else's job. Civil society organization can do it better. Research is you. Nobody can do it better for you, even when these other people are doing it. But your research is not for promotion. It's for you to generate evidence for policies and programs. And therefore, when you're not generating good quality research for Nigeria, international policies and programs harvest results from other places, Southeast Asia, Egypt, Nigeria, to inform policies and programs for Nigeria, and then it doesn't work. It wouldn't work when the context is different. But it's other people are prospering. They're all prospering because you, as researchers, are not doing the things you should do. It is research that has changed China. It is the research that has changed Japan. It's research that is sustaining America. But you are all doing research just to generate paper for promotion. That is sad. Do quality research, invest in quality research, including ethically considered research, so that international policies, when they are investing results, they can see the data for Nigeria and take decisions for Nigeria. That's the way we should go. And I think we should end on this note. That we...
I would like you to take this question, Ma, please. Just
okay.
Pardon. Yeah, I think it's quite important.
We have the ethical responsibility as researchers to grow our nation to become a great nation. And there's no nation, go check, that has grown to become giants without research. India is doing well. Malaysia is doing well. It's all research. It's all research. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, ma. So this last question, ma. What about research on disease patient, like doing retrospective research on hospital record? How does one apply the principles? Then
Please note.
given
Yes,
ma?
let me quickly answer that. Yeah, when
Okay.
you're doing retrospective research, please note that you must collect ethics clearance you must get your ethics clearance because there are two possibilities. You are collecting data without the consent of the participants. If you have access to the case notes, which is what you have all the time, when you're carrying people's case notes, you have access. It's not a blinded data. You have access. So you must go to ethics committee. And when you're carrying and handling that case notes, you must get informed consent. The second thing is for either, or the second option is to go to ethics committee to get informed consent waiver. And how you do that is that there is somebody in the library that will extract the data for you, so it is blinded. So you have access to blinded data, and that way consent will be waived for you. But once you are the one carrying case notes, then it's not blinded. You know who they are, and therefore you must seek consent. So depending on how you do these things, there are laws governing, and whatever ethical dilemma there is, we can always work it through. On that note, I want to say thank you. We have stepped over our boundary for 1 minute. Apologies, we always stop at the top of the hour. I say thank you for being here. Carry all the questions to the platform, and I hand over to you, Kudus. Thank you very much. Over.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof. I mean, it has been a very interesting and engaging session for everyone on the call. At this point, we'll call it a day. Do have a wonderful weekend. See you next week, Saturday. We'll be taking another interesting topic. Bye and have a great year ahead. You can still drop your question on the chat box on the WhatsApp group where it will be answered. All answered questions will be moved to the chat group. For those joining on the YouTube, thank you for joining, and join us again next week, same time, 8 a.m. Bye.